You ever boot up a tactics game thinking you're in control, only to realize 2 hours later that the game has been quietly controlling you the entire time? Every move feels deliberate, every mistake permanent, and every victory just barely earned. Tactical RPGs have a way of pulling you in like that. And while some get all the attention, others deliver just as hard. These are the kinds of games that don't just reward strategy, they demand commitment. And once they click, it's already too late. If you end up liking the content, please subscribe for more, and I'd appreciate it if you give it a thumbs up and tell me what you think down below. Love to hear it. Blackguards 2 takes everything people expect from a fantasy tactics game and twists it into something colder, meaner, and far less forgiving. Set in the dark world of Aventuria, this isn't a heroic journey about saving kingdoms. You play as a ruthless anti-hero building a criminal empire through manipulation, betrayal, and calculated violence. The tone is immediately different. Characters lie, allies are disposable, and moral choices are rarely clean. That alone makes it stand out in a genre often obsessed with noble wars and chosen ones. Combat is classic grid-based tactics, but it leans hard into punishing design. Positioning is everything. Armor matters, elevation matters, and crowd control can decide a fight in seconds. You're encouraged to exploit choke points, stack debuffs, and dismantle enemies piece by piece rather than rushing for kills. When things go wrong, they go wrong fast. The difficulty doesn't scale gently, and early mistakes can snowball into lost campaigns. That's where many players bounced off. The game expects you to understand its systems early and doesn't care if you're comfortable yet. Outside combat, party management and decision-making shape the campaign just as much. Companions have clashing personalities, questionable loyalty, and their own agendas. Ignore them, and you pay for it later. The story branches based on choices that feel genuinely uncomfortable, which adds weight but also limits broad appeal. Visually, it's serviceable rather than flashy, and animations can feel stiff. That combination explains the reception. Strong tactical depth, sharp writing, but rough edges and brutal onboarding kept it niche. For players who stuck with it, Blackguards 2 became a cult favorite. For everyone else, it felt hostile by design.
If the poison don't get you...
Fire Emblem Three Houses feels welcoming at first, almost relaxed compared to the genre's harsher entries. Bright character designs, a school setting, and long stretches of dialogue give the impression that this is a softer, more approachable tactical RPG. But that impression doesn't last. Underneath the social systems and anime aesthetic is a game obsessed with long-term consequence. Every choice you make, from how you train students to which house you side with, quietly locks in outcomes that can't be undone later. Combat sticks to classic grid-based tactics, but it's elevated by unit identity. Characters aren't interchangeable pieces. They're students you've trained, advised, and shaped over dozens of hours. Permadeath exists, and even if players disable it, the emotional weight remains. Terrain, weapon advantages, battalions, and positioning all matter, but the tension comes from attachment. Losing a unit isn't just a tactical setback, it's a narrative wound. Late-game battles hit harder because you know exactly what's at stake and who's standing on the front lines. Where the game draws criticism is pacing and balance. The monastery segments can feel repetitive, especially on repeat playthroughs, and the early game difficulty is forgiving to a fault. Some routes are clearly more polished than others, leading to uneven storytelling depending on player choice. Reviews reflect that split. Critics praised its ambition, characters, and replayability, while players debated whether its social systems overstayed their welcome. Fire Emblem Three Houses earns its reputation not through raw mechanical complexity, but by making strategy personal. It's a tactics game that understands emotional investment can be just as powerful as difficulty. Fell Seal Arbiter's Mark wears its inspirations openly, and that honesty is both its strength and its limitation. Built as a modern love letter to classic tactical RPGs, it delivers grid-based combat, job systems, and party customization that clearly echo genre legends. From the first few battles, it feels familiar in the best way. Units have clear roles, terrain matters, and smart positioning wins fights more reliably than raw numbers. The systems are clean, readable, and designed to support experimentation without overwhelming the player. Character progression is where it shines. Classes unlock gradually, abilities can be mixed across jobs, and building a squad that complements itself feels genuinely satisfying. The game encourages creative setups, rewarding players who think ahead rather than chase meta builds. Combat difficulty is adjustable, which makes it welcoming while still offering challenge for veterans. That flexibility is a big reason it earns such steady praise. But it doesn't escape criticism. Visually, the art style is functional but divisive, with stiff animations and character designs that lack personality for some players. The story, while serviceable, rarely surprises. It exists to support the combat rather than stand on its own, and emotional moments don't always land. That's why ratings tend to be solid rather than sky-high. Fell Seal doesn't reinvent the genre. It refines it. For players craving classic tactics with modern quality-of-life improvements, it delivers exactly what it promises. For those looking for bold narrative or experimental mechanics, it can feel safe, consistent, reliable, and deeply playable, but not transformative. Darkest Dungeon doesn't ask whether you're good at tactics. It asks how well you handle pressure when tactics stop being enough. On paper, it's a turn-based RPG with party formation, abilities, and enemy weaknesses. In practice, it's a psychological endurance test disguised as a strategy game. You manage a roster of adventurers exploring cursed ruins, forests, and catacombs. But the real enemy isn't what's lurking in the dark. It's stress, fear, and attrition slowly eating away at your control. Combat is brutally structured. Positioning determines which abilities you can use. Enemies target weaknesses relentlessly, and bad luck compounds quickly. Characters don't just lose health. They accumulate stress, and when it boils over, they snap. Panic, paranoia, selfishness, mental breaks can ruin otherwise perfect runs. Sometimes they rally instead, but betting on that is a mistake. The game forces you to think beyond winning fights. You're managing risk across an entire campaign, deciding who to sacrifice, who to retreat, and when to cut losses. That design is exactly why Darkest Dungeon divides players. Some find it oppressive, even unfair. RNG plays a real role, and no amount of planning fully removes that. Progress can feel slow, and failure is frequent. But that's also why it resonates so deeply with others. The art style, narration, and sound design reinforce a sense of dread rarely seen in tactical games. Reviews reflect that tension. High praise for atmosphere and originality, tempered by criticism of grind and randomness. Darkest Dungeon isn't about mastery in the traditional sense. It's about survival under pressure, and it never lets you forget that.
He missed.
Jagged Alliance 3 brings a franchise back from the dead by refusing to modernize the parts that made it special in the first place. This is tactical combat that thrives on chaos, personality, and stories that emerge naturally from bad plans and worse luck. Set in a fictional African nation torn apart by coups and warlords, the game drops you into a messy political situation with no clean solutions. You're not a hero saving the world. You're a mercenary commander taking contracts, juggling loyalties, and trying to survive long enough to get paid. Combat is turn-based and brutally honest. Positioning, cover, elevation, and line of sight matter constantly. Shots miss. Enemies flank. Grenades ruin perfect plans. But unlike many tactics games, it leans into unpredictability rather than hiding it behind percentages. Characters have personalities that directly affect how they behave in battle, sometimes refusing orders, sometimes pulling off clutch plays that save the mission. That unpredictability is the point. Every fight feels like a story unfolding rather than a puzzle to be solved. Outside combat, The strategic layer adds long-term pressure. You manage squads across a living map, defend territories, deal with local factions, and make choices that shape how the country reacts to your presence. Resources are limited, and mistakes linger. Lose a veteran merc, and replacing them isn't easy. The downside is pacing. Some missions drag, UI elements can feel clunky, and the game expects patience. Reviews reflect that split. Critics praise its depth and emergent storytelling, while some players balance off the slower tempo and lack of handholding. Jagged Alliance 3 isn't slick. It's stubborn, systems-heavy, and proudly old school. And that's exactly why it works. Into the Breach looks almost insultingly simple at first. Tiny maps, minimal animations, short missions that end in just a few turns. It barely resembles the sprawling tactical RPGs it often gets compared to. And yet, once you understand what it's doing, it becomes one of the most mentally demanding strategy games ever made. There's no fog of war, no hidden percentages, no surprise activations. Every enemy action is shown to you in advance. You know exactly what's about to happen. The challenge comes from figuring out whether you can stop it. Each battle plays out like a tightly constructed puzzle. Enemies telegraph their attacks. Civilians are always in danger, and your mechs have limited ways to intervene. Damage numbers are low, terrain is fragile, and positioning is everything. Often, the goal isn't even killing enemies, but redirecting them, blocking attacks, or sacrificing objectives to save the grid. That design forces a different mindset. You're not chasing optimal damage rotations. You're minimizing loss. Every turn feels like defusing multiple bombs at once. The brilliance is also where some players fall off. There's no narrative push during missions, no character drama unfolding mid-fight. Outside of combat, pilots have light backstories, but the game keeps story minimal by design. Runs can end abruptly, and starting over is expected, not softened. For players who want emotional investment or long-form progression, it can feel sterile. That's why its reception is interesting. Critics praised it almost universally, but player engagement varies wildly. Those who connect with its pure strategy become obsessed. Those who don't bounce quickly. Into the Breach earns its reputation by stripping tactics down to their rawest form. No luck, no spectacle, just consequence. Divinity Original Sin 2 is the kind of game that makes you question whether tactical RPG is even the right label anymore. It blurs the line between strategy, role-playing, and sandbox chaos until the genre boundaries stop matching. Every encounter is built around interaction. Fire spreads, oil explodes, poison clouds ignite, and water conducts electricity. The battlefield isn't a grid you move across. It's a system you manipulate. Creativity isn't optional. It's the entire point. Combat rewards experimentation more than optimization. Positioning, elevation, and environmental effects can turn impossible fights into trivial ones if you think sideways. Character builds are flexible to the point of absurdity, allowing wildly different approaches to the same encounter. That freedom is why the game is so widely praised. Few tactical RPGs give players this much agency and then trust them not to break everything. And yet, breaking things is half the fun. The downside is focus. Balance can spiral out of control, especially in later acts. Certain builds trivialize combat, while others struggle without heavy respects. The story, while rich, can lose momentum as side content overwhelms the main narrative. New players can feel lost, not because the game lacks explanation, but because it offers too many options at once. Reviews reflect that reality. Near universal acclaim, paired with warnings about scope and learning curve. Original Sin 2 isn't disciplined. It's indulgent. And that indulgence is exactly why it feels like one of the most mind-blowing tactical experiences ever made.
On the other hand, I really could do.
Phantom Brigade approaches tactics from a completely different angle, and that's exactly why it messes with your head. Instead of reacting to enemy turns, the game lets you see the future. Every move, every shot, Every explosion is projected seconds ahead, turning combat into a planning puzzle rather than a gamble. You're piloting mechs in a war-torn country, fighting a technologically superior force while managing resistant cells and scarce resources. The premise sounds straightforward, but the execution is anything but. Battles play out in real time, turns where you plan actions for your squad simultaneously. You see where bullets will land, where missiles will hit, and which limbs will get blown off if you miscalculate. Then the turn resolves, and chaos unfolds exactly as predicted or disastrously close. Mechs lose arms, weapons fall to the ground, and pilots eject mid-mission. The system rewards foresight and spatial awareness more than raw stats. When it works, it feels brilliant, like you outsmarted the battlefield itself. The downside is complexity and pacing. Learning the prediction system takes time, and early missions can feel overwhelming. The strategic layer, while ambitious, can feel thin, with repetitive objectives and limited narrative momentum. Customization is deep, but also fiddly, and balance swings wildly depending on gear drops. Reviews reflected that split. Critics praised the innovation, but noted rough edges and uneven progression. Players either bounced early or became obsessed. Phantom Brigade isn't universally loved because it asks you to relearn how tactics work. But once it clicks, it feels like playing tomorrow's strategy game today. The Banner Saga looks calm on the surface, but it's one of the most punishing tactical RPGs you can play. Inspired by Norse mythology, it trades flashy combat for bleak atmosphere and relentless consequence. You lead a caravan of survivors through a collapsing world, managing food, morale, and alliances while fending off increasingly desperate enemies. Every decision feels heavy, and the game never reassures you that you made the right one. Combat is deceptively simple. Battles are turn-based on small grids, but the strength system ties health directly to damage output. Taking hits doesn't just bring you closer to death, it makes you weaker. That single design choice reshapes every encounter. Do you finish off enemies quickly or chip them down to reduce their damage? There's no perfect answer, and mistakes compound fast. Boss fights are brutal, often forcing sacrifices that feel narratively earned but mechanically unforgiving. Where the Banner Saga divides players is repetition and rigidity. Enemy types don't evolve dramatically, and combat scenarios can start to blur together. The story is powerful, but deliberately bleak, offering little relief or catharsis. Some players burn out under the constant pressure. That's why its ratings, while strong, are never universal. Critics admire its art, music, and emotional weight. Players either connect deeply or walk away exhausted. The Banner Saga doesn't aim to entertain you endlessly. It aims to make you feel the cost of survival. And for those willing to carry that weight, it leaves a lasting mark. Troubleshooter Abandoned Children is one of those games that quietly overwhelms you with depth before you even realize what you signed up for. On the surface, it looks like a stylish anime-inspired tactical RPG about young mercenaries cleaning up crime in a corrupt city. But once you get a few hours in, it becomes clear this game is operating on an entirely different level of mechanical ambition. It blends grid-based tactics with RPG systems so layered that even genre veterans can feel buried at first. Stats, traits, passive abilities, synergies, resistances, everything stacks and everything matters. Combat gives you an absurd amount of control. You're not just positioning units and selecting abilities. You're shaping how characters fundamentally behave in battle through mastery boards that let you equip dozens of passive effects at once. Builds can turn a character into a counter-attacking monster, an evasion-based duelist, or a battlefield controller that locks enemies down before they can act. When the systems click, the game feels incredibly rewarding, like solving a massive tactical equation in real time. Enemy design supports that depth, too, forcing you to adapt rather than brute force encounters. Where it struggles is approachability. The game explains a lot, but the sheer volume of systems can feel exhausting. Early missions can drag, story pacing is uneven, and the visual presentation, while stylish, lacks polish in animations and UI clarity. Some players bounce before reaching the point where builds truly shine. That's reflected in its reception. Reviews often praise its depth and ambition while warning that it's not friendly to casual players. But because it's unapologetically deep, for players willing to commit, it becomes one of the most mechanically satisfying tactical RPGs available. For everyone else, it feels like too much game at once. Battle Brothers strips tactical RPGs down to dirt, blood, and steel. There's no grand prophecy here, no chosen heroes. You lead a mercenary company in a low fantasy world where survival depends on contracts, coin, and knowing when to walk away. Every soldier is expendable, and the game makes sure you feel that truth early. Loss isn't a setback, it's the expected outcome of bad decisions. Combat is turn-based on hex grids, built around positioning, fatigue, morale, and equipment. Armor matters. The terrain matters. Even weather can decide a fight. Battles are slower and more deliberate than flashier tactics games, but every action carries weight. Poor positioning gets characters surrounded and killed. Injuries linger. Veterans become valuable not because they're powerful, but because they're still alive. That creates stories organically without scripted drama. The strategic layer adds constant pressure. You manage finances, equipment, morale, and contracts while the world reacts to your choices. There's no main quest pulling you forward, which some players love and others hate. Without strong narrative direction, motivation has to come from the systems themselves. And while the depth is impressive, the presentation is utilitarian. Animations are stiff, visuals are plain, and the onboarding is unforgiving. That explains the reception. Critics praise its depth and emergent storytelling, while casual players bounce off its harsh learning curve. Battle Brothers isn't welcoming, it's honest. And for players who embrace that honesty, it becomes unforgettable. Wasteland 3 sits at the opposite extreme, overflowing with systems, dialogue, and player choice. Set in a frozen, post-apocalyptic Colorado, it blends tactical combat with heavy role-playing, dark humor, and political satire. You're not just fighting battles. You're negotiating alliances, managing reputation, and constantly choosing which version of wrong you're willing to live with. The tone swings between absurd and brutal, sometimes in the same conversation, and that unpredictability defines the experience. Combat is squad-based and turn-driven, with cover, flanking, and status effects playing major roles. Positioning matters, but so does build planning. Characters specialize deeply, and poorly thought-out squads struggle hard in later encounters. Environmental hazards, traps, and enemy synergies keep fights dynamic, especially on higher difficulties. When everything clicks, battles feel earned and tactical rather than chaotic. Where this struggles is polish and balance. At launch, bugs and performance issues hurt its reputation, and even now some encounters swing too hard depending on RNG or build choices. Pacing can also suffer, with dialogue-heavy sections slowing momentum between fights. That explains its ratings. Strong praise for writing, freedom, and combat depth, tempered by technical complaints and uneven difficulty. Wasteland 3 isn't clean or restrained. It's loud, messy, and opinionated. But for players who want tactics wrapped in consequence and dark comedy, it delivers something few games even attempt.